Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of UK Edu Stories with myself, Buki Youssef, and my co-host, Mark Anderson. This week, we're going to be looking at data privacy, why it's important to you, your students, and your school. And it's quite a topical discussion, actually, considering that there have been some features that have been shared concerning schools and ransomware attacks. So I think it's really good to hear the advice from our two guests this evening with regards to what schools can actually do and what we can do on an individual basis to keep ourselves and our data protected. But really quickly, Mark, how's your week been?
Yeah, really good. Thank you, Bookie. Spinning Plate launched a new periodic table yesterday, which has been receiving some nice comments and feedback. And they're always good starters for 10. How about yourself?
Busy week. All I can say is, when does my Easter break start? That's all I'm going to say.
Not soon enough by the sounds of it.
Yeah. We break up next week. So, still just hanging on tight until then.
Well, fingers crossed everything goes brilliantly until then, Bookie. I know you've been working so hard and you've had a really tough 2021 so far.
Yes.
So I hope you can get some good rest over the Easter break.
Thank you.
And you. So really looking forward to having a chat with our guest this evening. Our guest this evening, as you'll have seen on the little promo image that came up a second ago, is none other than Tony Sheppard. So welcome to the show, Tony. And we also have with us Rowenna Fielding. Welcome, Rowenna, to the show as well. Welcome both.
Hi, Tony and Rowenna.
Hi.
So how are you, Tony?
Doing well, keeping nice and busy. But you know, you never expect any different from me. Always got my finger in lots of pies.
And relaxing in the Hufflepuff common room, it seems, this evening.
It's just one of those things. It's lovely, warm, nice, and just chilled.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Tony. And how are you, Rowenna?
I'm not too bad, thank you. It's nearly Friday, so that's good. And it's nearly the Easter holidays, so that's good. And people are talking about data protection, so that's excellent. What more could I possibly ask for? Apart from a lot of gin.
Hopefully that'll come on Friday. Fingers crossed. For those people who don't know you and what it is that you do, starting with you, Tony, would you want to sort of sharing a little bit about your background and how you came to be a guest on the show this evening? Because clearly yourself and Rowenna have got some form, as it were, when it comes to thinking about data privacy. So could you share a little bit about yourself and who you are, what you do, that sort of thing, please?
So Tony Sheppard, also known as Grumbleduke or GDPR Tiger. I have been working in EdTech for everything from a lowly mouse cleaner all the way through to a non-teaching assistant header, director of IT, working with the local authority, rolling out broadband and VLE services and supporting schools with choosing the best tech. As part of that, I've also worked with Bector on the original, back in 2008, 2009, 2010, guidance on data protection and information management. And that's always been a strong interest of mine going through. More recently, I was working with GDPR in schools as the head of services, leading the DPO service and helping doing things like write the DFE data protection toolkit for schools.
Crikey, so a lot of experience then. Sounds like you can have an awful lot to share that's going to be of real use this evening. Thank you so much, Tony. Thank you. How about yourself, Rowenna?
Yeah, I am. I'm a professional data protection nerd. I'm a natural geek, and data protection just gives me that perfect balance of being able to be geeky, but also being able to, care about people and stuff. So I started off in IT, and then I was in IT security, but I've been doing data protection for the past just over a decade. I started off in charities, and then I went into consultancy. And so I've worked with lots of different types of organizations in lots of different sectors, including schools, both state schools and private schools and faith schools, and further in higher education as well. I've done a few articles here and there, written a bit of guidance here and there, and pretty much taken every opportunity to get up on my soapbox and bang the data protection is a good thing and should be embraced drum, much like Tony does. And yeah, it's really great to see people talking about data protection and not with a lot of swear words around the topic either, but genuinely engaging enthusiastically with it. So yeah, it's data protection is kind of my life. I went self-employed late last year, which is a great time economically to go self-employed, but life got in the way, and now I basically run around trying to tell anybody who'll listen about what data protection is, why it's a great thing, how it works, and how to do it so that it works, rather than to do it to tick boxes.
Okay.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for introducing yourself, Rowenna. Bookie, did you have the first question you'd like to?
I do. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Let's jump in.
Yes. Thank you, Mark. So what are the barriers to schools understanding what they need to know about data protection and privacy?
A
meaty one.
Yeah.
All right, Rowenna, would you like to start?
I would say time and money, like everybody else. Schools, like a lot of other places, they're doing things. They've got an enormous amount to do every day. It's not just the actual teaching stuff, but there's also admin, keeping the school going, and the pastoral care of students. It's a huge amount to do, and just having time in that day for people to be able to learn about what's pretty much a whole new language and a whole new set of concepts, even to learn about that before they even start sort of re-engineering processes and systems and digging into privacy culture. So time, I think, is the biggest barrier. And then the second one I would say is probably money. Because data protection expertise, if you don't have it in-house, that's something you're going to have to pay somebody else to bring in.
Okay, thank you, Rowenna, for kicking us off. Tony, what's your response to that?
I mean, time and money really does sum it up. I mean, time is such a finite resource, and all of the ways that schools have been supported in the past to try and funnel information to them as efficiently as possible and actually direct them in the way they should be going, lots of that isn't there anymore, because there's the expectation that, especially within England, the multi-academy trust system, there's there's obviously economies of scale, but when you're a multi-academy trust of 3 or 4 schools, you don't have that economy of scale. And just because you're in a big academy trust doesn't mean you're doing it right. You've still got to have somebody spending the time working out, okay, what is it we want to do? Not, we need to do something, this is something, let's do this.
Okay.
And the number of times I look back and watch Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, and you can see the conversations that are being had in there that are still relevant today, especially the episode about Big Brother and the introduction of computer systems, and people will be able to see everything. And that is almost a perfect example of what people don't understand about data. I mean, the topic of the day is data privacy. Data privacy is generally a US term. We tend to say data protection and privacy.
Oh, right.
The DFE will say data protection. They don't mention the privacy bit. So there's many of us, like Rowenna, will heavily mention the privacy bit because that's where our data protection comes from. And like everything else, it's got a broad and deep history around it, all based around human rights. And that's not necessarily something that comes into schools, because you don't need to know the background of legislation within schools. You just need to deliver it.
Yeah.
And so that time, that subject matter expertise is hard to come by. People, let's face it, the other big barrier, people don't like change.
True.
So
You know.
jumping into that, Tony, how can schools then be helped to get a better picture of what personal data is being used and how can they best sort of be placed to know, how they can actually put that legislation into practice?
You can take two approaches. You can take quite a holistic approach and look at every aspect of school life where you need to use the information. Start from the ground, actually look at your data processing, your data flows. Or you can take a jigsaw model and you can look at each different system, each bit of software you use, have a look at what data's in there, and then join it together. Now, you've got to start somewhere. I tend to prefer the jigsaw methodology because it gets people engaged and it's not too scary. And you can, as much as people say you shouldn't do it that way, it's nice and easy to say to folk, okay, let's just go out and list what software you've got. Let's list what data you've got and what you're doing. Not should you be doing it, but let's just actually get that list to start with. And that's actually a good place to start, because without that list to start with, how can you actually tell, people in the privacy notice what you're doing with data? Okay, you need to have that list. There are tools out there to help you with it, tools that will help you scan networks for where files are, where particular software is. That's if you know all the software that's installed on all the machines in school. Okay.
Yeah.
Black IT is something we know is is prevalent within our schools quite often, where many well-meaning people have actually gone ahead and done things because they know it'll make a difference. And there's a person on here who's well known for just going ahead and doing things because they know it'll make a difference. Okay, and it's one of those things where that innovation is good, but you also need a little bit of tempering behind that and a couple of important questions in that tool set to ask as you go along.
So what sort of questions should be being asked then?
Exactly. I thought you were going to say it. That's why I paused.
I would always start with.
Go on now.
Go on.
I would always start with, what is it you're doing and why? And then on the back of that comes, how do you do it? And that's whether I'm in a school or talking to a bursar or an HR person or a actual frontline educator or in a business or wherever. The first place, the best place to start really is to get them to think about the story of their day. What do they do on a day-to-day basis, and why do they do it, and how do they do it? And from that, you can start picking out the data stuff. I mean, it's like if somebody says to you, think of a joke, your mind goes blank. You're like, suddenly I'm the least funny person in the universe. So and if somebody says to you, right, list all the data you use on, in your job. Yeah, but if you take a storytelling approach and kind of tease out the details, you get a lot richer and more useful information than if you throw a spreadsheet at somebody and go, fill that in. So I guess just like with education, you've got to sort of reach people on a level that makes sense to them and take them on the journey with you, rather than just like chucking stuff at them.
Yeah, that is a really good, I can tell you in terms of consultancy, that is a very good model. Start with where people are and then move them on. So yeah, that's really good. Thank you, Rowenna. I'm gonna, since you're on the screen, I'm gonna pose the next question to you. So why are data protection and privacy so important? Because some schools might think, oh, it's yet another thing to do.
Well, because human beings do this thing where we're not always really very nice to each other. And actually, when you add sort of technology and large groups of people into the mix, the capacity for humans to not be very nice to each other is quite large and scary. So data protection law actually arose from the UN Convention on Human Rights, which was put together after the Second World War. And they basically kind of sat around a table and thought, well, awful things have happened. How do we put some kind of prevention in so that we can try and head off these awful things happening again? And the answer was human rights for all human beings, no matter what, say size, shape, color, flavor. All human beings have human rights. And the right to privacy is one of those human rights. The right to have a zone of personal space, physical or virtual, and the right to have the freedom to, make your own choices to a degree. It's basically the right to be left alone to get on with your life. And there's a darn good reason for interfering with you. Data protection law evolved from that because we're in the information age. Everything is data. Data is much a part of you as your skin or your nails or your fingers. And again, with human rights, you've got a zone of autonomy. So somebody interferes with your data, they're interfering with bits of you. And computers allow that sort of thing to happen a lot and very fast. So data protection law, what that does is that it takes the idea of human rights and it brings it into the virtual, on paper as well as on computers, virtual world. So while data protection and privacy might not look really important in your kind of day-to-day job, day-to-day life, pretty much all of the things that you're doing are doing in a way that's safe for you, because the law gives you this concept of personal space, autonomy, being able to make up your own mind and your own choices and not have other people interfering with you. And data protection and privacy are important because without them, basically people can interfere with you in ways that would be bad for you, bad for them potentially, bad for kind of everybody really. The reason we have these laws is because we've seen what happens when we don't have them and we don't enforce them, and that's not pretty at all. So yeah, they protect people's human rights, their freedoms, their quality of life and their welfare, and that's why they're important, even if they are a bit of a pain sometimes.
Yeah, no, thank you. And thanks for highlighting, because I didn't even realize it was linked. And the stuff that I've read when when it first came out in school, it was quite dry and turgid. They made no mention about protecting your human rights and things like that. So it's great, I think, to bring it back to that core principle. Thank you, Rowenna. Tony, would you like to? Oh, sorry, I was going to say, Tony, would you like to add to that before we go to the next?
Go on, Tony. Sorry, my apologies.
The thing that I would add, Rowenna's got it perfect, absolutely perfect. The thing I would add is schools are used to safeguarding, and more often than not, I try and tag on to safeguarding as a routine to having those conversations. And I talk about having a triangle, a risk-based triangle of safeguarding with online safety at the top. You'll have data protection and privacy, and then you'll also have health and safety, because that's where mental health actually comes under, and mental well-being. And that's all risk-based. And getting people to the idea that the same decision-making process occurs in each of those corners of that triangle, and is so interlinked, is actually quite an important bit. And human rights is integral to all of those three sections as well. And it helps the conversation along a bit. And although it steps into another legislation, PECA, which is a conversation for another day, when we think about people interfering with your human rights to be left alone, you've just got to turn around and say, scam phone calls. People are abusing your data with scam phone calls. That gets home to people, to say somebody is taking something of yours and using it to try and scam money out of you. Okay? That's the sort of thing that can happen with people who have got your data.
Right.
And that's everyone experiences those. And again, that's just another way of saying, okay, it's not some, European court airy fairy thing. If people see the European courts as that side of things, they actually do make some really very important decisions, okay, which do affect so many things in life. But people think of it as an institution far away. Yeah. You mentioned the scam phone calls, and they can recognize and associate with that very, very quickly. So yeah, it is a case about making it meaningful. Whether you use mental health, safeguarding, the example of scam phone calls, it's about making it meaningful.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for your contribution. And I'll hand over to you now, Mark. Sorry.
Thank you, Brookie. No, I completely agree with your approach there. Making things actually sort of fit within people's frames of reference, like you say, with the scam phone calls and things. It really helps them actually understand the impact of how things can end up and how actually it impacts on them directly. People often don't think about what data is involved or what data different people might hold about them as well. So the next question sort of relates straight into that, really. How much personal data do schools actually use, and what sort of personal data do they actually keep and hold? And since you're on screen, Tony, I'll go to you first.
My friend, so myself and a colleague sat down 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, and we worked out that if we were just looking at what goes through data integrators, so the folk like Group Call and Wand and Overnet Data and Salamander Soft and folk like that, you're looking at between 4.5 and 5 petabytes of data a day. That's enough sheets of paper to go to the moon and halfway back per day. And that's what goes from an MIS system within a school out through a data integrator to go to your the catering company about payments that have been made. That's going to your VLE provider. That's going to your cloud service for your online classroom. That's what goes around. That's not including the data that gets moved around within those systems itself. So that's a conservative estimate. But that's nothing when you compare to how much data someone like Facebook shifts a day, and you could, well, what they say they shift a day and what they actually shift a day may be two different things. It's a case of, well, we don't shift that, our partner shifts that, or whatever. But it's a case of data shifts, data moves, it happens, and a massive amount does. Some people see, sort of data protection and privacy as a niche area, and education even more so. But actually, when you consider, you've got 24,000 schools in England alone, not including early years, and you add on Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland as well, and the independent sectors within there as well, and childcare. This is 17.5 million individuals we're talking about, and in education, health and social care are probably the prime areas where data moves around for them. When you get older, it then becomes more of your online shopping, online content you create yourself. Yes, that is being pushed down to an earlier age, and we can talk about how we educate children about that as well later on. But it's a case of within schools, it's a massive amount. It's and we know it's a massive amount because now, the ransomware, the cyber criminals, they're now attacking schools because they know it's an easy vector. It's a very open space to go to now. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities there, but it's a massive amount.
No, it is. And for guests viewers who aren't aware of how much a petabyte is, it's great that you had the sort of example there of the sheet of paper to the moon and back. When I'm explaining it, I talk about, 1 megabyte is 1,024 bytes. And then you work your way up from the megabytes to the gigabytes to the terabytes to the petabytes. So just 1 petabyte is 1,024 terabytes. So if you think about how big that is, and then we're thinking about that, and it's again some more, it is absolutely phenomenal the amounts of data that's being sort of passed around here. Thank you for sharing that, Tony. Rowenna, did you have anything to add on to that, or should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, as well as the amount of data that's flowing around, there's also the types of data, and schools have very it used to be called sensitive personal data, but everybody got confused between sensitive and confidential, which are actually two different things. So now it's called special categories of personal data. So if personal data is like radioactive material, then special category personal data is like weapons grade radioactive material. Super, super dangerous stuff to be playing around with. And that's information about things like somebody's health, their religion, their ethnicity, their sexuality. Probably at schools level, there won't be much in the way of trade union membership or of the children, but the teachers will. Teachers have personal data too. They're important too. And so when you look at how that's used in practice, it's not just attendance, registers, scores and marks. Then you get into behavioural assessments. Tony mentioned safeguarding. So there's a whole load of really, really high octane stuff in there. Then there are schools who've got CCTV, so all the footage that's gathered. There are schools using internet filtering and monitoring, so every pupil's individual internet activity, and then perhaps what schools that are using software that starts to profile children based on their computer activity. So you've got inferences about kids and labels which can potentially affect their lives for a very long time. You've got your lunch money and what the kids are eating. You've got emails between parents and teachers. There's just an incredible amount of information, and some of it is really, really sensitive, really dangerous stuff. Not just even in the wrong hands, in the right hands with the right intentions, but not handled safely and not used wisely. And obviously, kids are among the most vulnerable members of our society. They're impressionable, they're easy to manipulate, which is why the advertising industry is so keen to get in front of their eyeballs. They are learning about the world, so they are really vulnerable to being manipulated and taken advantage of through information about them, even more so than the rest of us, and all humans are really. So schools are probably the hotspots for privacy risk in a way that most businesses aren't, and perhaps only healthcare and social care are similar in the level of risk to the individual that could possibly arise as a result of having so much information about them.
Crikey. Thank you so much for
sobering.
That, Rowenna. It's sobering thoughts, isn't it? Thank you to Claire Archibald, who's joining us in the chat this evening, viewing this evening. From the smile, I think clearly somebody who's in your frame of reference, both of you. She's made a few comments. She's talking about never leaving a school client without a clear action plan and understanding. That's vital. No way you can check stuff. She shared that point when you were talking about sort of telling the story of your school day. Rowenna, a few moments ago. She also talks about SARS being can potentially be a pain for schools, but from a human perspective, if you actually speak to clients, you can just see how important it is to individuals that they have access to their own records. And so linking into your most recent comments, Rowenna and Tony, she also says we also treat free school meal and pupil premium status as a sensitive category as well. So thank you for sharing your insights there, Claire. Thank you very much indeed.
That's actually quite an interesting position. When the DFE were putting together their data protection toolkit for schools, they were keeping special category. So they were saying that these are the ones you treat as sensitive data. And there were a few of us who said, actually, no, there are other things you need to treat sensitively. Okay, they may not be under the legal definition of special category personal data, but they do need treating sensitively. And it took a bit of conversation, and then it was almost as if the penny dropped. And at that point, the doors opened a bit more as to, well, actually, there were other things we need to consider. And that really helped dig out some of the conversation. So, I mean, that's why when you have a look at the toolkit, it does talk about other areas to treat sensitively. And that's one thing that we, as much as people, including me, might have a go at the DfE for certain things. That toolkit is actually a really good starting point. So yeah, definitely you've got to consider things that aren't just special category. You've got to think about what you need to handle sensitively as well.
Can I just ask, when you say handle sensitively, what do you mean within this context?
Keep your hands off it unless you've got a darn good reason for doing anything with it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, just in case. No, this is interesting. No, perhaps this might be useful. Unless you can justify it with a clear causal link between the thing you're trying to achieve and the necessity for the data, stay the hell away from it.
Okay, that's very clear.
Start me on biometrics.
Well, I have a slightly different position on biometrics.
Okay.
Slightly, generally the same, but slightly because, but that's become from my techie experience of setting things up with biometrics and actually having to have gone through all of the trials and tribulations and checking things out properly, which I'm not saying that all schools do, far from it. But there are some good things you can do. Admittedly, you get some people who, so there was one vendor down at BET who was telling me how wonderful their facial recognition software was, and it's brilliant. You could just hold up an iPad and just take a picture of the whole class, and it goes through and checks on the facial recognition, and it marks them all in their attendance. Yeah, and it's things like that, because there are some people that do things without thinking, and keeping things forever, and just in case, and causation is a really important word. I mean, anyone that's done action research within education will know causation and correlation are two different things. And I'll try and dig out for the show notes. There's a wonderful website that actually looks at stupid areas of correlation, where it's a case of the number of people who have died falling out of the bath against the number of Nicolas Cage movies in a year, that sort of things. And and basically all it is somebody's chucked in lots of data and just seeing what two things that they can match up and show that there's a correlation. As a perfect example of where just because you've got data doesn't necessarily mean that it's meaningful. And if it's not meaningful, it's not useful, why on earth are you using it?
Just in case. All right. Okay. I think it's great time now to share the next question. How can schools help to explain to children and families about data protection and privacy? And I will share that to Tony first, if I may, please.
Right, schools have got, there's a requirement within the data protection principles to be transparent. And that's to say, this is what we do, why we do it, how we do it, and give people the understanding about how their rights are dealt with. Generally, that comes in through the privacy notice, which, if you'll read a lot of schools, they'll have pinched their DfE one, filled in a few bits, but not really understand what they need. It should be done in a clear and transparent and age-appropriate manner. And most people write it for the parents. They don't write it for the children, because it's a case of, well, why would children understand that? Well, because it's not part of the curriculum. There are materials out there. So the ICO grant-funded LSE, the Media and Communication School within London School of Economics, to prepare materials to collate, curate and create materials to support families and children's understanding around data protection, and the My Privacy materials in there are brilliant. They align and fit in extremely well with UKIS, the UK Council for Internet Safety. They have the Education for a Connected World framework. Fantastic resource that really does show schools, families, children, and ed tech vendors what the expectation should be about where children see themselves within their digital life, not just within data protection and privacy and that side of things. You've got Southwest Grid for Learning, who've taken those and converted it into Project Evolve. So they're lesson plans, and they go from early years all the way through. And the whole idea is to educate children from word go. It's a very simple thing. If you're introducing a new bit of software, a new cloud service, a new VLE, something like that. Does it take that long for someone to have written up something for the teacher that's going to be working with them to say, okay, this is what we're doing, this is what we're going to use it for. By the way, we'll be using X, Y, and Z to allow us to do this, and this is how we're going to protect you. It's just a little thing at the very start that, just further, fills in some of the gaps of when, and unless you start when they're young and just building it when they go through, they're not going to expect it. So that means it makes it easier for when they're an adult for people to make use of their data and profile people and things like that. So you're educating the future generation, as we do with lots of other things. We need to do it about personal data as well. So yeah, by all means, have those, introduction evenings when you're introducing a new way of doing computer assessment or monitoring or communication with parents. Do that and be clear with them there and then about what you're doing and why you're doing it. It's only a little thing, but the more frequently you do it, the more they'll understand it. And it's just little bits. Keep going, keep building on it.
Thank you, Tony. If I ask Rowenna if you'd like to contribute anything in addition to what Tony's actually said.
I don't think there's anything that I can add that would add value to that excellent answer. I mean, Tony's exactly right.
I have to admit, I have pinched some of that from a talk that Rowenna did about 2 years ago at a data protection conference. So, it's a case of, I mean, the same way that you do within education, the privacy world, the data protection world does exactly the same. When we see something that works well elsewhere, has got some really good principles behind it, we'll make use of it, and we'll be honest and open about where we get it. Exactly the same way that happens within the education world as well. So, I'm the first to hold my hands up and say, "I magpie,"
Oh no, that's awesome. That's the way it should be.
Yes.
And I think there's one thing that Tony touched on there that's really important is not about the storytelling, obviously, but caring. I mean, obviously, people in education care about other people, because otherwise they wouldn't be in education. They'd be, I don't know, a stockbroker or something. With apologies to any stockbrokers watching. Caring is something that inspires people. So drawing the link between what we're doing here in terms of privacy and data protection, and we're doing this because we care about your human rights, your privacy, your educational experience, your future, the welfare of your kids, each other as colleagues, making it about caring, and not in a performative, we take your privacy very seriously way, because no one ever even believes that, but actually living it and showing it, and like Tony said, by doing things like getting hold of age appropriate educational materials, because there are some great stuff out there, and using going, educators are always being asked to go above and beyond. So it kind of seems a bit mean to go, you got to do it with this as well. But you're not going to get paid any extra for it. But, finding somebody who is enthusiastic about this stuff, and making it about the people, and turning that into practical activity, not approaching it ever as we've got to do this to tick the box. Like, the opposite of good data protection always.
It's so interesting to hear hear words like care and making it practical. And again, I'm just thinking back, a few years when we had the GDPR training and things like that, and it's the complete opposite of this. So it's just interesting, I think. And I'll stop there, because, as I say, it's quite interesting about the fact that central to all of this is people, but we treat it in such a cold and blanket way that's removed and divorced from our interactions with people as well.
And part of that is that it takes effort and time, brain power, and kind of space, thinking space, stopping space, starting space, to engage with people as people. Whereas if you can put out one spreadsheet or one e-learning module that kind of tries to cover everything generically, but in a very impersonal way. That's easier and cheaper. So what's happening is that, and I see it's not just in education, all over the sphere. Everything is sacrificed for efficiency, but there are some things where efficiency is less significant than thought and care. Some things need friction, like brakes need friction in order to work.
Yeah.
If you go around trying to make everything frictionless, stuff will be crashing into other stuff all the time, and people will get hurt. So making good data protection educational content, it does take thought, and it does take time, and it does take that kind of relationship building that in a lot of ways the information age, the high-tech society is trying to do away with, and you can't do away with the personal touch and succeed in stuff that requires personal care and thought. It's like you've got to balance them.
Thank you. I'll hand over to
Thank
Mark.
you, Rowenna. What I'm loving about this conversation this evening, actually, though, is that I'm a computing teacher by trade, and so I used to teach my kids. Data is information, and data is just plain data. It doesn't become information until it's got context. It's a very raw and kind of like sort of things quite difficult to be really tangible. It's quite intangible, I think, to children. What I'm loving about the conversation and the things that we're talking about relationships. We're talking about care. We're talking about human rights, and it's so lovely having this refreshing conversation. I think more people would actually benefit from sort of thinking about these things in this sort of a way. And jumping out to Claire again in the audience this evening. Thank you so much. She is talking about pupils being data subjects, so addressing privacy information to them, and we need to get better at this. So she gives a practical example about the children know they're actually on CCTV when they're playing, and are all your signs at adult height level, but why are they not at a height level for 4-year-olds? Because 4-year-olds can ascertain what's going on from looking around. They know all these different things. So it's great. But what's lovely, Claire's follow-up comment is that schools that she's been working with really do care about all these things. It's just that so many schools are really terrified about it as well. And I guess it might just be that it's almost like the data boogeyman, maybe, in that you don't really know what it is, what you have to do with it, and it gets a bit scary. Then you think it's a tick box. It's easy to understand how schools can get themselves into a bit of a pickle with all of this.
And
so
and this is one of these are some of the myths that you'll find. You'll have the myths around, InfoSec will answer all of your problems, InfoSec and Cybersec. And with the recent announcement, NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre, they've said education sector is a target. And so you've already found, some of my InfoSec and Cybersec colleagues, bless them, they want to get in there and make a difference, but they're doing it with, we will solve your problems. No, it's a tiny bit. It's a tiny bit. And unless you actually take care about everything else, dealing with the Cybersec bit, it might stop some bit, but it won't stop other bits. So the whole idea that IT is the complete, start and end of data protection and privacy is one of the things that needs to be cleared up. And I think I've said that a lot politer than Rowenna would think.
I'm on my best behaviour this evening.
So it's a real problem. I mean, you've also got the fact that people will talk about, the ICO will do this. As of yet, the ICO has never fined a school for a data protection breach. Now, there was one company that recently meant that 2 schools have had legal notices from ICO. That was actually not to do with a breach. Technically it was. It wasn't to do with a Cybersec breach. That was actually to do with schools not checking which parents had granted consent for photos of their children to be put up online on websites or shared. In both these cases, it was one child in each school. They were both former looked after children. So, and being an adopted parent myself, I know how that feels. And it's very much a case of, they didn't follow and do the checks that they should have done. So rightly, when the complaint went in, the ICO went, we uphold that, and they sent letters. It wasn't undertakings that were signed off between the school and the ICO or the trust in the ICO. It was just a notice to say, sort yourselves out. So when people talk about fines, actually some schools have been fined by the ICO though, and they've been fined for failing to pay the data protection registry fee. So it's a case of, yeah, we'll fine you if you don't get your money from you, but we won't fine you for other things. And we can then go on to a whole conversation about whether the ICO is a suitable regulator or not. They have a massive job to do. They really do. It's hard for them to pick and choose what they're doing. They are doing half of their job is actually doing stuff that the DCMS, the Department for the Digital Culture, Media and Sports, should be doing. So it's hard for me to give them too hard a time. I know some people would do. I'm actually a bit more pragmatic and understand that they can't do everything. But yeah, I mean, you'll hear about schools saying, you know, you'll be fined if you don't. Well, actually, yeah, you could do. But think about the damage to people instead. That should be what you're thinking about.
Yeah.
How quickly can we get our systems back up online so we can start teaching again? How can we make sure that we've got the right safeguarding information? You know, how can we make sure that we know about people's allergies? You know, it's that sort of thing. Care about the people. Don't care about the fines.
I think that's a really good point. A lot of organizations have been viewing and dealing with data protection as a compliance issue. And you know, that in itself straight away raises kind of mental barriers, because compliance, you know, you must comply, you must do what you're told. And with a compliance approach, you're looking to do the bare minimum you possibly can in order to get away with doing the stuff that you need to do. And that is entirely the wrong approach for data protection, actually also, and health and safety. You know, you don't do health and safety to be compliant, you do it to stop people getting hurt. And it's exactly the same with data protection. If you take a compliance approach to data protection, you will never be doing enough to protect people's human rights and freedoms. Whereas if you take a care-based approach, a harm prevention approach, then you may find that you go over and above what the letter of the law requires, but actually most of the time you'll just be coming up to the bare minimum. Whereas if you take a compliance approach, you will never, ever fulfill the requirements of law, because the requirements of law say you have to think about the risks to rights and freedoms. You have to make decisions based on your risk thinking, and you have to uphold people's rights. And you can't do that with forms and software and paperwork. Those are tools. They're not answers. So yeah, it's treating it as a compliance issue is just veering past the point completely. It's about harm prevention and care for people.
That's not to say you can't use compliance as a way of getting in through the door. And you know, and talking with, you know, school business managers, if you mention compliance to them, they'll know we've got to listen, if nothing else. So that is a handy way to get through the door with them. You know, and most people in schools who are dealing with compliance, because it is schools, they do have that natural caring part of them as well. Well, I say most. I think we all know some folk in schools who may not be that caring, or you know, or more be more efficiency driven, especially within some SLTs. But you know, it is a case of folk in schools do care. They generally do tend to care more, and if compliance is a way in to have that conversation, then by all means use it. Just don't rely on it and don't stop there. Governance is the other way. So governance is another way, and again with governance, some people view governance as, you know, we have to do this so that we can account for ourselves. Well, yeah, you do. You have to account for yourselves. You've got to be accountable. You've got to be able to justify decisions you've made. You've got to be able to show what decisions you've made. You've got to have actually made decisions in the first place. But that governance issue isn't, you know, schools that have got a governance issue about data protection have usually got governance issues about a whole ton of other things within schools. So, you know, it's a case of, if you can use governance again as a way in to start that conversation, brilliant. If that's the way that they engage with it, brilliant. But it's not going to be the whole answer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't mean to sound like I was discounting compliance. What I meant is treat compliance as a measure of your success, not the success itself.
Yeah.
The success is caring about people. Compliance is a tool that helps you measure how well you're doing that. It's not unimportant, but it's not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal is to use compliance to protect people.
Yeah.
I think you're absolutely right there, Rowenna, and I love the health and safety analogy that you gave there as well, as did Claire in the chat as well. She said she's actually going to nick that and use that for herself in her explanations. I think a useful analogy as well with all of the with this sort of thing as well is that sort of difference between schools who run their schools as if with the Ofsted inspection handbook as the rule book for how you run your school, versus how you run your school based upon your vision and values. And the Ofsted inspection framework is there to actually, help give pointers and be there, not non-pointers, that's the wrong way of explaining, but a good Ofsted is a byproduct of you running and leading your school really, really well. So compliance will be a byproduct of you doing really well when it comes to thinking about your data protection and those sort of things. It shouldn't be the focus. It should be a byproduct of you doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, I think. Tony, you mentioned a few minutes ago the word myth, and I'm mindful we've got 9 minutes left. So if we could perhaps, time's flown this evening. Just to ask you both, really, the question is that sort of 3 myths. I'm going to sort of ramp up the question a little bit, because the question is, what are the 3 biggest myths that you've heard of around children's data that you've heard of? But I'm going to sort of tie that into a sort of follow-up question. When you explain your myth, and I'll come to you first, Rowenna, and then to you, Tony, on this question. When you've explained the myth that you want to share, could you then talk about and share, how schools can sort of circumvent that sort of thinking? What can they do to make sure this doesn't become the everyday sort of conversation? So, if that's okay with you, Rowenna, go for you first.
Yeah. So, the myth I'd like to tackle is the idea that you can get better quality outcomes and better protection and looking after of people through increasing surveillance. As in the idea that in order to find the needle in the haystack, you must add more hay. Actually, increasing data gathering and increasing the watching process is harmful for privacy. It might be good for security, but that's not the same thing as privacy. And also, when you put people under constant surveillance, it changes their behaviors, their attitude, it stunts their growth as an individual. So when schools are thinking about the security part of data protection and about the things like safeguarding and being accountable and showing that they're accountable, I think what they can do to combat that myth of surveillance is the answer is think about the alternatives to surveillance, which obviously is quite difficult because those are the sorts of things that generally require human beings, which have to be paid for, and that's very difficult. But look at every answer you come up with from a what could possibly go wrong, how could this be bad, not just a kind of the marketing guy says that this was the answer to our safeguarding problems or whatever. More data is more risk. More collecting data is more threat to the individual. So the myth is that more data can make things better. It's not true. The treatment for that myth is, again, like we've been saying, to think about the person, do a data protection impact assessment, which is essentially that process of, right, evil genius hat on, what could possibly go wrong with this thing that we're doing? Consult with parents, consult with the students themselves in an age appropriate way, consult with other educators, consult with privacy professionals. Don't assume that the closer scrutiny of individuals is better for those individuals, because It's mostly, unless it's done really carefully, it's really not.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rowenna. What are your thoughts, Tony?
There are a number that I could go to follow on a little bit from Rowenna. Again, I take a slightly different point of view. But again, that's part of, some of it's my technical background, some of it's the safeguarding background, some of it is the work that I do at the moment with, at the moment I'm working with net support, and net support have got some, do come in for a bit of a bashing at times about, oh, well, you're monitoring what goes in, what goes on within the classroom. It's a case of, well, yeah, it's called behavior management. And as long as behavior management is actually what you're trying to do, and then you're using information as a tool to do that, rather than gathering the information in to then make a judgment, that's the right approach to it.
Okay.
And working with organizations that want to take that approach of, yeah, we've got prevent and we've got things like that, but actually what we want to do is we need to know why we are doing this in the first place. What's the best way of doing it? Let's do it that way. Test and adjust. Really important thing, test and adjust. And it's human beings that need to do that adjustment. If I hear machine learning and go AI once more, that's not to say it can't be beneficial. It can, but it has to be meaningful, and you have to be careful with it. But probably my biggest myth is going to be consent. Consent. Oh, we've got to get consent from parents to do this. No, you don't. Oh, we've been told by our EdTech vendor, we need to use consent. No, you don't. Your EdTech vendor is your data processor. They've said they're the controller. Really? Are they making the decisions about things? Are they? Are they really? Do you have a choice between using them and using somebody else? Yes. In that case, you're making the choice. Well, really? Are we? So, but it's their algorithms. Are they using algorithms, or are they actually using a set of rules that you can ask them about and judge whether it's acceptable or not?
Okay.
And this comes back to that data protection impact assessment again. Doing your due diligence, do your homework, ask them questions. More often than not, you'll see consent mentioned by predominantly US companies or companies targeting the US with their tools, because there's legislation in the US, the same way that there is all around the world, and they talk about either parents showing consent or the school saying that they have got it from parents. Whereas, and I've had a long conversation with a couple of legal folk over FTC about this over in the States, what they're talking about is there is an agreement around a lawful basis existing. And so getting EdTech companies to change their language within their agreements so that they're more GDPR and UK and European centric rather than US centric, it's an ongoing piece of work. And that's actually, my bread and butter. I have that conversation with them and help them have better conversations between them and the school and make things a bit more transparent, which makes schools' lives easier as well. But consent, presuming that consent is needed for everything.
Yeah.
On the converse, presuming consent is not needed for anything. Again, it comes down to that impact assessment. It's reviewing what you're actually doing, why you're doing it, what rights are you upholding? Objection, erasure of data, they're not, complete, they're not rights that will always be enforced. Okay. Can you delete my attendance data because I don't want my parents to show when I've missed lessons? No, fail the clock. No. It'll disappear when my data retention says it disappears. This behavior instance, can that be erased? Or I object to my child, their attendance being recorded within the management information system and being shared with the government. Actually, there are some things you might want to say you object about that. And the recent, not so recent work, but done by folk like Defend Digital Me and Liberty, actually highlighting that actually the DFE shouldn't have collected that data and shouldn't have put an emphasis on schools. So actually schools should not just be questioning what they're doing, they should be questioning folk like the DfE. So it is part of a bigger thing. So, folk will challenge DfE about curriculum, and curriculum design. They also need to think about challenging them about funding, which they do. But what about other things, about privacy? So again, it's about that consent isn't needed for everything, but consent is needed for some things. Know which is which.
Yeah.
The thing with consent, if you can't say no, you can't get consent.
No, that's right. Yeah.
If there's no way to, if you can't say no without suffering detriment, or if you say no, but there's no way to put that no into effect, then what you don't have consent. And you will never have consent. So, for example, in employment, an employer can't ask their employee to consent to data processing for, payroll or whatever, because there's so much imbalance of power that the employee fears saying no.
Oh, I see. Okay.
Legally valid consent. It's got to be informed, freely given, specific, unambiguous, and evidenced. And if it can't meet all 5 of those requirements, then it's not even legally valid consent. Go and look at something else.
Yeah. And if you can't find something else,
don't do
that might mean you don't process that data. So, it's a case of there might be times when you want to do something when actually you can't. And there are reasons for it. The just in case bit, it's a case of, yeah, that might be a nice thing to do, but actually, should you be doing it?
Yeah, is it
just
really
because
necessary?
you can, it doesn't mean you should.
If you can't do it safely, you've got no business doing it.
We all know some science practicals like that, don't we? Just because we could do it doesn't mean that we should have done it.
Okay. I've just seen the time. I have to say, could I just say as we wrap up, before we wrap up, I didn't expect this conversation. As soon as you hear talk about data privacy and data protection, it's like, oh my God, it's really boring. This has been fascinating, insightful, and there are certain things that I need to go away and actually look up. But having said that, my last question to you both, if I may, before we wrap up, if someone's actually interested in learning more about data protection and data privacy, where would you suggest they could actually find it? Particular people they could actually listen to, or maybe not blogs, podcasts and things like that. Are there any things out there that provide accurate information for others that want to learn more about this? Besides yourselves, of course.
The thing with data protection is that if you ask 3 data protection professionals the same one question, you will get 8 different versions of the answer, because there's always a lot of it depends in there.
It
but
depends.
Having said that, there are basic resources. There are resources for learning the kind of rules of the road before you develop your driving style, as it were. So with general data protection, it certainly can't hurt to read through the ICO's guidance documents. It won't make you a legal expert, but it will give you an understanding of what the whole thing's all about. There are some amazing people in the privacy sphere doing excellent work. So you mentioned Defend Digital Me, Jen Person. She's definitely one to follow. There's so this is the point where I don't want to start name dropping all my competitors. But actually, I would say if you're looking to learn, then Twitter and LinkedIn are great for that. There are also various Slack communities that are focused on data protection, or even data protection in education. There are some highly entertaining blogs out there. This is the point at which I do #shameless plug for my blog. URL at the bottom of the screen. And also talk to people who are in the industry, talk to people who have an interest in the industry, and don't be afraid to not have all the answers, because none of us have all the answers. It's impossible to know all the answers. Such a huge topic. So I would say, get out there, be proactive, start conversations, learn about things, and keep an open mind. And embrace the love of human rights. Of course.
Thank you so much, Rowenna. Thank you. Tony, last point from you, please.
Right. So I would say that the DfE Data Protection Toolkit for schools is a good place to start. It actually is. It's got some problems with it. It's got some things that actually don't make life easy for itself, but actually it's got lots of resources and some really good examples of things in there. So go there. The group that wrote it, they when the DFE basically stopped doing any more work with it, the DFE said spin off your own website. So we did, and that's the educationdataMatters.org.uk site. That's got some useful things in there, including DPIA templates, security information request forms to send over to your suppliers. It's got some good things in there as well. There are some really good DPO services out there, and it's been brilliant to see Claire on here, because the work that her and her and the other Claire up in Derbyshire have been doing is fantastic. If you're going to follow two school DPOs, Claire and Claire, definitely, and they've got, so many fantastic ideas, and they have faced so many different problems. They're not, massively experienced within, the privacy sector either. They've come in from other areas with having, a bit of a background with things, and they've, really grabbed the bull by the horns and just gone with it. And that's because they've been out there, they've asked questions, they've got involved in conversations. And there were some good places, LinkedIn, Twitter, but I'd also say somewhere like the IOMS, Information and Records Management Society. Okay. They, for records management, data protection, records management is an integral part of that. They have the records management toolkit for schools as part of that, so you can freely access that. You get full access if you're a member, which isn't that much. I think it's only about 90 quid or 100 quid, something like that. And there's a raft of people in there across public sector, schools, FEHE, health, all sorts of places, charities, who've got a wealth of experience and advice as well. And everybody is so helpful in there. They've helped me, God knows how many times over the years. They really have.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Tony and Rowenna. Really insightful discussions.
So many great resources being shared there as well. And just to say to you, Tony, the love is mutual. Claire said she's absolutely loved this evening. The human side of data protection in schools has really come out. So it's clearly a mutual appreciation society. So whilst they might be competitors, you're certainly all on the same page in terms of your thinking there. Some lovely comments. Claire saying thank you to you for your lovely comments as well. See, Amy saying it's amazing. Unfortunately, we are completely out of time, and that's absolutely fine. And the best episodes always go over a little bit, don't they, Bookie? But being mindful of that time, I'm going to have to wrap things up and just say thank you very much to you, Rowenna, and to you, Tony, for taking time out of your busy lives to come and share with us, and to our audience as well. Thank you so much for that. Bookie, did you want to say anything before we sign off?
Apart from have a good evening, be safe, is there anything more than, or the fact that we're going to have a bit of a break? Is that what you're referring to?
That's one thing I was going to mention when you did your bit. So tonight is our last episode before the Easter break, because a number of schools are actually breaking up this week. I know some schools. I think you're breaking up middle of next week, Bookie, aren't you? And my children are going right through until next Friday. But given that some schools are breaking up this week, we are starting our Easter break for UK Edu Stories as of this evening. So this is the last episode until our next episode, which will be the 22nd of April, where we have some guests joining us who are former educators, former teachers, who now work in the sort of educational technology world. And then we'll talk about the transition from being a teacher to working in that sort of a space. So really interesting to hear from them. Some of them are people who have started their own businesses and running those, and some of people who've moved into other sort of educational technology companies as well. So really excited to hear their perspectives and find out how they found that transition moving from teaching full time into a slightly different office-based environment and all of that sort of stuff. So we're looking forward to that on the 22nd of April. But for now, final thanks again to Tony and to Rowenna, and as always to you, Bookie. and to everybody watching this evening. And if you haven't done so yet, please do hit that subscribe button so you never miss an episode of UK Edu Stories. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the other side of the holidays. But in the meantime, keep yourself safe, look after yourselves, and make sure you get a good rest over that Easter break. Thank you so much indeed. Take care, everybody. Bye.
Bye.